What was your overall favorite aspect of the 90s? It can be like fashion or makeup or music.
I loved the music of the 90s. There were a lot of really fun, diverse artists, lots going on. And the fashion, the makeup was crazy. Very colorful eyeshadows and things like that, which I thought was fun. And big earrings. Everybody was wearing big, fun, goofy earrings.
Did you wear makeup like that?
I did. I'm embarrassed to admit. Yes, I did. I had my rainbow eyeshadow and my big hoop earrings, or my earrings that look like little plastic fish, and all sorts of other goofy things. Also, a lot of big boxy boyfriend blazers and jeans. That was a big thing when we would go out, and that was a lot of fun. I rocked that look big time.
What do you think that you had in the 90s that would be like helpful now? Like whether it's like a societal thing or like
You know, back in the 90s, we had an amazing president, someone who led this country who was intelligent, thoughtful, and looking forward, forward thinking as opposed to looking backwards, as we seem to have these days. So if I could go back and have the type of presidency and political scene that we had then. Also, politicians in general seemed to get along more. They didn't, bicker. The left and the right would learn how to work together on issues, and that was refreshing, and that doesn't seem to happen these days. So I'd love to see us go back to that.
do you feel like the people are the same? Like they're more like maybe tolerant or they're less tolerant?
It's funny, yes and no. On some levels, I think young people are more tolerant. I think that I love the fact that whether it's being more accepting of each other, with whether it's sexual preferences or black kids and white kids not seem to be so hung up on race and color and those type of things. I think that's different. But by the same token, in some ways, I feel like people don't treat each other as kindly, and people judge each other more. And I'd say the older generations, not kids. Don't seem to be as caught up in it, but people aren't as kind to each other as they were then. So it's a little different. So there's some good and there's some bad.
What are your most vivid memories of the 90s?
For me personally, also good and bad. The bad, my dad died in the early 90s, and that was the first real loss that I had ever experienced as an adult. That was really hard and sad for me and my family. But I also met my husband in the 90s, a couple of years after my dad died. So obviously that was my future at the beginning of my own family starting to be. So in that regard, it was a lot of fun.
Do you think that you're the same person that you were in the 90s?
Absolutely not.
What's changed?
Oh, I'll start with the good. The good is I feel like I'm a more tolerant person. I feel like I've learned to kind of relax and not take life and or everything else so seriously. My family might disagree with that, but I feel like I used to be very type A and had to get things done. I had lists and checking things off, and I was very rigid in that regard. And I've now learned that, you know what, not everything's going to get done, or at least not in the manner that I'd like to see it done. So I've learned to relax a little bit, so I'm not quite as rigid as I used to be. But by the same token, I have a lot more responsibility now than I did in the 90s. In the early part, I was single, and even when my husband and I first started dating, we had a lot of time to hang and be, do fun, goofy things. And now, mortgages and jobs and life has become more serious, but it's all good.
Do you miss the 90s? And if so, why?
Again, I think I kind of do, because I feel like I was a little more innocent then in my life. I also feel like, as I talked about before, I just feel like, we were as a society more hopeful than we are now. People seem to be so stressed and worried about our future, both as a planet and on an individual basis. I feel like we were more accepting of people back then.
You already kind of touched on this, but would you want society to be the same as it was in the
No,
90s?
because everything, things evolve. I mean, just as we just talked about now, how there's some good and some bad, you got to mix it up and make it different and look toward the future. So no, I think as much as I sound nostalgic for certain things that went on back in the 90s, I think it's okay living in the current time that we're in now, looking toward the future.
Why do you think that the 90s were important to our society today?
Oh God, that's a really good question. I think oh God, that's tough. Why do I think it's important? I think every decade and every generation has its own significance and importance. In the 90s, The bad is some political things went down that I think they were still feeling the reverberations from. There was a crime bill that Clinton, who I know I said he was wonderful, but the one thing he did that was kind of negative, that was put into effect in the 90s. And we're still, when I say we, the African American community is still kind of feeling the reverberations of that all these years later. So that was a negative. But I'm rambling. I hope I answered your question okay. But so, aside from that, but for the most part, as I said, it was a cool time. It was a great time in my own life, and I think for society as well.
What were your, like a lighter question,
Mhm.
what were your personal favorites of the 90s, whether like styles or like
Okay.
whatever?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit before.
Yeah.
Obviously, the music. I love the music. And just kind of thinking back on some of that as we started talking about the 90s, it made me start thinking about some of the songs I liked back then. And that was so much fun. And I think, as I said, it was a lighter, easier time in my life. So for me personally, again, I sound like I'm repeating myself a little, but that made it kind of fun for me. But yeah, I think in general, it just seemed to be we were a little more carefree as people than we are now.
I know you said music was your favorite part.
Mhm.
So who do you think were the most influential musicians?
Ooh, for me personally, I know it's going to sound weird because I really don't like rap that much in general. Rap, it makes me sound so old, hip hop or whatever. But I love Eminem. It was something about him, and he kind of emerged during that time period. The way he kind of spoke to me. So that's probably my favorite. And the other would be, oh God, now I can't think of her name all of a sudden. Alanis Morissette. That album of hers just kind of like turned me, and I think a lot of other people, turned us into started thinking about a whole different type of music and songwriting and girl power, so to speak. So those are the two artists that kind of, when I think of the 90s, they seem kind of iconic to me.
All right, those are all the questions I have.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to chat with you.
Had fun. Thanks, Mom.
Mm-hmm.